pilot faints while flying jet. Minutes later, a miracle happens. Captain James was a seasoned pilot with over 30 years of experience flying commercial airlines. He was in the middle of a routine when suddenly he started to feel strange. His heart was racing, his palms were sweaty, and his vision became blurry. He tried to shake it off, thinking it was just a passing moment of anxiety, but the feeling only intensified. James looked out the window and saw the clouds swirling below him. He felt like he was falling, even though he was still in the cockpit. The flight attendants noticed something was wrong and came to check on him. He tried to hide his distress, but they could see that he was clearly struggling. They offered to help, but he reassured them that he was fine and would radio for assistance if needed. However, as the flight continued, the feeling only grew stronger. James was having trouble concentrating on his instruments and was starting to lose control of the aircraft. He quickly realized that this was not just a simple case of anxiety. Just as he was about to radio for help, the plane jolted and the lights flickered. The passengers started to panic and the flight attendants were rushing back and forth, trying to calm them down. James's heart was pounding in his chest as he struggled to regain control of the plane. He felt as if the aircraft was being pulled in multiple directions at once. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew it was beyond his control. But why did James get sick? And most importantly, are the passengers safe? Hey there, ViralVids here. Before we go on, like this video, smash the subscribe button, and click the notification bell. We post the most beautiful, amazing, and scary videos every single day. Let's proceed with the video. As James regained consciousness, he was still in the cockpit of the plane. The mysterious light had vanished, and everything was eerily quiet. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the feeling of disorientation, but the strange feeling returned. His heart started racing, and his vision became blurry again. He tried to radio for help, but the radio was dead. He looked at the instruments and saw that the plane was still in flight, but he had no idea where they were or how long he had been out. He started to panic as he realized that he was alone and in control of a speeding aircraft with no communication to the outside world. He took a deep breath and tried to focus on regaining control of the plane. He checked the autopilot, but it was off. He looked outside, trying to get his bearings, but all he saw was clouds. He was completely lost. Just as he was starting to get a grip, the strange feeling returned. This time it was stronger, and he couldn't fight it. His heart raced, his vision became blurry, and he felt himself losing consciousness. As he drifted into unconsciousness, he thought about his family and how he might never see them again. He thought about the passengers on the plane, and how their lives were now in his hands. He tried to cling to consciousness, but it was no use. James was an experienced pilot with over 30 years of flying experience. He had flown countless flights without incident, but this one was different. He was flying with a new co-pilot named Sandra, who was fresh out of flight school and had very little experience. Throughout the flight, James had felt uneasy. He wasn't sure if it was because of Sandra's lack of experience or because of something else. He had tried to shake it off, but the strange feeling only grew stronger as the flight progressed. Sandra was a young woman who had always been fascinated by airplanes and flight. Her father had been a pilot, and she had grown up listening to his stories of flying and adventure. But her world was turned upside down when her father died in a plane crash. Despite this tragedy, Sandra was determined to follow in her father's footsteps. She studied hard and worked her way through flight school, earning her wings and becoming a co-pilot. This flight with James was her first real opportunity to prove herself as a capable pilot. She had been nervous, but she was also excited. She was determined to show James and the rest of the crew that she was capable of handling any situation that came her way. As James lay unconscious, Sandra knew that she had to act fast. She was determined to keep the plane on course and make sure that James received the medical attention he needed. She quickly assessed his condition and determined that he was suffering from hypoxia, a lack of oxygen to the brain. Sandra sprang into action, taking over the controls of the plane and setting a course for the nearest airport. At the same time, she started administering oxygen to James, hoping that it would revive him. As she flew the plane, she kept a close eye on James, hoping that he would wake up. But he remained unconscious, and she knew that she was on her own. She was terrified, but she was also determined. She was going to do everything in her power to save James and the passengers on the plane. Hours passed as Sandra flew the plane. all the while keeping a close eye on James and administering oxygen. She was exhausted, but she refused to give up. She was determined to get the plane on the ground and get James to a hospital as soon as possible. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she saw the airport in the distance. She was exhausted and terrified, but she was also exhilarated. She'd done it. She had flown a plane on her own and saved James's life. Sandra sat in the cockpit, her heart racing as she tried to control the plane. She had never felt so scared and alone in her entire life. She'd been flying for less than an hour, but it felt like an eternity. She was completely out of her depth, and she knew it. Her father had been a pilot and she had grown up around aviation, but she had never flown a plane on her own before. She glanced over at James, who was still unconscious and barely breathing. She was desperate to get him help, but she didn't know what to do. She made the flight attendant make an announcement for any medical personnel on board to come forward, but to her growing despair, no one responded. Just as she was about to lose all hope, she heard a sound outside the cockpit. She cautiously peered through the window and saw a figure walking towards the plane. It was a man, and he was heading straight for the cockpit. Sandra quickly made her way back to the cockpit, her heart racing with fear and uncertainty. She braced herself as the man approached and opened the door. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man simply smiled and stepped inside the cockpit. He was dressed in all black with a leather jacket and dark sunglasses. He had a mysterious air about him, and Sandra couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen him before. "I'm here to help," the man said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I know this is a difficult situation, but I promise I'll do everything in my power to help you." Sandra was skeptical, but she was also desperate. She quickly explained the situation to the man, and he listened attentively. As the mysterious man took the controls of the plane, Sandra couldn't help but wonder what his real motives were. Was he really there to help, or was there something more sinister going on? The next few hours were going to be critical, and she didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was for sure, she was about to find out. Sandra watched in amazement as the mysterious man expertly landed the plane on a nearby lake. She couldn't believe that they had actually made it to safety. She was filled with relief and gratitude towards the man who had saved her and James. As soon as the plane was safely on the water, Sandra called for help. A team of rescue workers arrived to assess the situation and provide medical assistance to James. He was quickly taken to a nearby hospital, and Sandra was told he was stable but still unconscious. As she sat on the shore of the lake, Sandra couldn't help but reflect on everything that had just happened. She was overwhelmed by the experience and grateful to the man who had saved her and James. She wanted to know more about him and what had led him to be in that place at that time. She made her way back to the plane and found the mysterious man sitting inside. He was calm and collected, and he gave her a reassuring smile when he saw her. "Are you all right?" he asked. "You've been through a lot." Sandra nodded, still in shock. "I just can't believe it," she said. "You saved us. I don't even know your name." The man simply smiled. "My name's Jack," he said, "and I was just in the right place at the right time." Sandra was about to ask Jack more questions when a group of soldiers suddenly approached the plane. They had arrived to secure the area and make sure that everyone was safe. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one of the soldiers said, addressing Sandra. "We need to ask you some questions about what happened here." Sandra looked back at Jack, feeling a mix of confusion and fear. She had no idea what was going on or what was going to happen next. All she knew was that she was about to find out. Sandra sat in the airport terminal, still in shock from everything that had happened. She had just been through an incredible experience, and she was still trying to process it all. She couldn't help but think about the mysterious man, Jack, who had saved her and James. Hours later, as she was getting ready to leave, she saw him walking towards her. She stood up, unsure of what to do. Jack approached her and gave her a smile. "I just wanted to check in and make sure you were okay," he said. Sandra nodded, feeling overwhelmed. "Thank you," she said. "I just can't believe everything that's happened. I have so many questions." "I understand," Jack said. "Let's talk." Sandra sat down with Jack and they talked for hours. She learned that he was a military man who had flown for the military for many years. He was incredibly skilled and experienced, and he had been in the right place at the right time to save her and James. As she listened to Jack's story, Sandra felt a deep connection to him. She couldn't explain it, but she felt as though she had known him for her whole life. When he handed her a card with his name on it, she felt a sense of familiarity wash over her. "Jack Shields," she whispered, looking at the card. Suddenly, she remembered something. Her father's name was Jack Shields. She couldn't believe it. She started to cry, feeling as though this was a call from heaven. "What's wrong?" Jack asked, noticing her tears. "My father was a pilot," Sandra said, wiping her eyes. "His name was Jack Shields. I always felt like he was watching over me, but I never thought I'd actually meet someone with the same name." Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with compassion. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said, "but I'm here now, and I'm gonna make sure you're safe." Sandra looked up at Jack, feeling a sense of comfort and safety. She was grateful for his presence, and she felt like she had finally found the answers she had been looking for. But just as she was starting to feel a sense of peace, Jack suddenly stood up and announced that he had to go. Sandra watched as he walked away, feeling a sense of sadness and uncertainty. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change forever. What did you think of this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video and subscribe. See you next time!